Think Cowboys ate steak and beans every night. Not even close. Out on the open range, no saloons existed, no printed menus, and no mercy. Dinner was whatever you could hunt, fry, or boil in a rusty pot. From fried rattlesnake to vinegar pie, these dishes were not just colorful, they were about staying alive. No padding, just 25 real meals cowboys actually ate while riding through dust and danger. Some will make you gag, some will make you hungry, and a few might even make you miss the Wild West. Let us get to it. 1. Pan de campo, camp bread. Don't be fooled by the name. This was not a soft, fluffy loaf. Pandow camp bread was a dense, no-nonsense flatbread made from flour, lard, salt, and baking powder. No yeast, no rising, no pretensions. You mixed it, patted it out, and baked it in a skillet over an open flame until it was browned or charred depending on cookie's mood. It was the trail's go-to starch. Fast, filling, and sturdy enough to survive a week in a saddlebag, cowboys used it to mop up grease, cradle stew, or just gnaw on when rides went long and dry. It did not spoil, did not crumble, and needed no refrigeration. About as perfect as trail food could be. If you were lucky, Cookie might toss in a pinch of wild herbs or smear a bit of leftover bacon fat on top before baking, turning this rugged bread into the nearest thing cowboys had to a dinner roll. Pretty, it was not. It was warm, it was heavy, and it did not complain when you swore at it. 2. Chuck wagon fried steak. Every so often a steer went lame, got sick, or simply dropped in the dust. When that happened, cowboys did not waste time mourning. They sharpened their knives. If you could not ride it, you might as well fry it. Chuck wagon fried steak was not a tender, marbled T-bone. It was usually a tough cut hacked straight off the carcass, tossed into a hot skillet and fried in beef tallow until it turned brown, crusty, and, with luck, chewable. Salt, if you had it, pepper, if you were blessed. Otherwise, just heat, meat, and hope. Most trail cooks did not bother with flour or batter. This was not chicken fried steak. This was a survival steak. Sizzling grease, smoke in your eyes, and a slab of beef on a battered iron pan while 20 men stared at you like wolves. You cooked it fast, served it hot, and prayed nobody broke a tooth. It was also a rare morale booster. A fried steak dinner meant something had died, but not you. And on the open range, that was reason enough to celebrate. 3. Fried beef, liver, and onions. Let's be honest. Liver is not winning any popularity contests today, but in the open range it was pure gold. When a steer went down, the liver was one of the first things Cookie cut loose and slapped into the skillet. It was rich, it was loaded with iron, and it let the cowboys pretend they were eating something fancy if they shut their eyes tight and ignored the texture. Slice it thin, drop it into hot grease and fry it up with some wild onions for flavor, or regular onions if the chuck wagon was lucky enough to be stocked. Either way, it smelled incredible, like meat and smoke and something faintly medicinal. The texture was, well, liver, a little rubbery, a little creamy, a lot intense. Some cowboys loved it. Others just loved that it was not beans. But nobody complained, because fresh meat was fresh meat. And if Cookie fried it right, it was halfway decent, especially after a week of chewing on rock-hard bread and regret. 4. Oxtail stew. When a steer was butchered, no part went to waste, including the tail, which just so happened to make one of the richest stews on the trail. Oxtail was packed with collagen and flavor, but it took time. Hours of slow simmering over an open flame, until the meat fell off the bone and the broth turned thick enough to stick to your ribs. Add some potatoes or wild onions if you had them. But even bare bones, this stew was a cowboy classic. The best part? That gelatinous fall-apart texture that made even the toughest cowpoke slow down and savor it. It was not fancy, just bone, broth, and grit. But out there under the stars, it tasted like you had raided a hotel kitchen. You did not merely eat oxtail stew, you honored it. Because when Cookie had the time and the fuel to slow cook something like this, you knew it was a good day to be alive. And let us be honest, any meal that could hush a cowboy for a moment, keep him from grumbling about sore saddles or stubborn cattle, was a stew worth remembering. 5. Venison or antelope stew. Out on the open range, beef was not always on the menu, especially when it belonged to the rancher's herd and not your stomach. But wild game, that was fair game. When a cowboy got lucky with his rifle, deer or pronghorn antelope became dinner. The meat was lean, sometimes tough, but stewed low and slow. It turned into something almost tender, especially with a few onions, wild herbs, or a rogue potato tossed in. The flavor was bold, a little earthy, and definitely different from beef, which made it feel like a feast, even if it was just meat and water in a dented pot. And unlike salted meat, this was fresh, juicy, and did not squeak when you chewed it. Every cowboy remembered the days they bagged a deer on the trail, not just because it filled the pot, but because it broke the monotony. In a world of repetitive meals, this was a rare dose of wild freedom. And if Cookie managed to stretch it over 2 nights, that man earned a second cup of coffee in the front spot by the fire. 6. Ash roasted potatoes. Ash roasted potatoes were what a cowboy reached for when meat was out of reach or he had nothing to show for the hunt. He went to the earth, literally. Potatoes were inexpensive, easy to carry, and hearty enough to last weeks in the chuck wagon without spoiling. All you did was toss them straight into the coals of a dying fire and forget about them for an hour. No pot, no pan, no fuss. Just ash, embers, and patience. The skin blackened and blistered, but inside they turned soft, smoky, and almost buttery, even without any butter. Cowboys split them open with a pocket knife, sprinkled on salt or a bit of bacon grease if they had it, and dug in. Some swore by the charred bits, saying it tasted like home if home were on fire. It was not glamorous, but when the sun sank and your bones ached from riding, a hot, ash-roasted potato felt like a small miracle wrapped in soot. And if someone had a tin of chili flakes, dried herbs, or a pinch of coffee grounds to dust on top, that was frontier seasoning at its best. The sweetest part? No dishes. Just kick the ash aside and ride on. If you'd been riding with them, which simple supper would you have made? Tell us below. Ash-roasted potatoes, cornmeal dumplings, or a dish your family loved. We'd be honored to read your story. 7. Cornmeal dumplings in wild onion broth. When flour was gone and meat was only a memory, cowboys turned to cornmeal again, this time shaping it into dumplings dropped into a hot broth flavored with foraged onions. It was modest, certainly, but warm, filling, and smelled better than most trail hands after a week in the saddle. The broth came from boiling wild onions, garlic if it was on hand, and whatever herbs could be yanked from the ground nearby. Spoonfuls of cornmeal dough, just water, salt, and fat, were dropped into that broth and puffed up like little yellow clouds bobbing in a muddy pond. It was not saloon cooking, but after a long day in the saddle and a stomach chewing through your belt, it felt like something your grandmother might make if she were broke and riding with a Winchester. 8. Cactus pad hash. Every bite was tender, savory, and just greasy enough to remind you it was not health food. This was trail fare meant to keep your legs moving and your hands steady on the reins. Out where trees were scarce and cacti plentiful, cowboys turned to a surprising ingredient: prickly pear pads, also called nopales. You had to be brave enough to dodge the spines and clever enough to prepare them right. Once the needles were scraped away with a blade or singed off in the fire, the pads were sliced into strips and thrown into a hot skillet with onions, wort, and whatever scraps of meat had survived the night. It was not pretty, and it certainly did not smell like a saloon roast, but it was zesty, filling, and oddly nutritious. Nobody out on the trail was counting carbs. If it grew in the dirt and did not kill you, it went into the pan. Some cowboys added dried chilies or a pinch of beans from the previous night to bulk it up. The texture could be a little odd, but the flavor was bright, earthy, and just enough to rouse a trail-weary soul. 9. Pan-seared turtle with riverbank greens. You would be surprised what a hungry cowboy could turn into supper. When the trail ran by a creek or river, turtles were fair game. Slow to flee and full of protein, these shelled creatures made a practical and at times tasty open-range meal. The meat was tricky to clean. It demanded a steady hand and some grit. But once you got past the shell, turtle flesh was tender, sitting somewhere between chicken and fish, with a taste that said, "I was not planned, but I am welcome." Cowboys would pan-sear the meat in grease with garlic or wild onion when they had it, then add whatever greens they could forage from the riverbank, often dandelion, sorrel, or watercress, to finish the dish. You could eat it right off the skillet with a belt knife, still sizzling, juice running, steam rising like a prayer to the prairie gods. Most folks around town would turn up their noses at turtle, calling it too swampy. Cowboys did not bother with opinions. They worried about full bellies and a warm fire. 10. Pan-fried apples and salt pork. When your stores had dwindled to one bruised apple and a slab of salty pork, you did not whine. You made do. Pan-fried apples and salt pork turned into one of those odd cowboy pairings that not only worked but felt downright satisfying. Cowboys cut the pork into thick strips and fried it in a skillet until the edges curled and popped like bacon on payday. Then they added sliced apples, wild if they were lucky, dried and rehydrated if they were not, and let them sizzle in the remaining fat until soft, golden, and caramelized at the edges. That salty-sweet combo was a fortunate accident that stuck around, especially in the colder months when fresh fruit was scarce and flavor even scarcer. Sometimes Cookie would splash in some cider vinegar or pinch in cinnamon when he felt generous, but most of the time it was simply apples, pork, and heat. Cowboy comfort food that reminded you life did not have to be pretty to be good. 11. Ash roasted corn in husk. When the fire was dying and bellies started to grumble, cowboys would toss ears of corn, husks and all, right into the hot ashes like it was second nature. No boiling, no butter, just flame, smoke, and a quick prayer. It did not turn to ash. This was field corn, not the sweet variety. It was usually picked from nearby fields or relieved from an unattended crop. The husks kept the kernels from charring too fast, trapping steam while the embers did their work. 10 minutes later, you had a hot, smoky ear that popped when you bit into it and stuck in your teeth like a stubborn memory. Some cowboys sprinkled salt on them when they had it. Others smeared them with animal fat after the coals had cooled. But most simply brushed off the ash and grabbed them with dirt-caked hands, answering with a satisfied grunt. It was far from gourmet, but it was hot, quick, and needed not a single pot or pan. For a man who had not eaten anything green in a week, those blackened husks were about as good as treasure. 12. Dried pea soup with fat back. Pea soup might bring to mind the kind your grandmother made when you were ill, but on the open range, it was survival in a single pot. Cowboys carried dried split peas because they were light, cheap, and did not spoil, even after weeks jostling in a saddlebag alongside sand, sweat, and gunpowder. The method was plain. Dump the peas into a pot, add water drawn from the nearest stream, strain through whatever hat or sock was handy. Toss in a slab of fat back, that thick, salty strip of cured pork belly, and let it simmer until the peas broke down into something between a stew and a paste. It was not pretty, and it was not fast, but it clung to your ribs like wet denim and warmed you through even when the wind ripped at the tent flaps. Some trail cooks added onions or wild herbs when they found them, but most often it was just peas, pork, and the unmistakable smell of something cooking that was not jerky. 13. Smoked venison sausage. When cowboys rode into timbered country or linked up with local trappers, venison could be a prized haul. Turning that meat into sausage was a bit of frontier showmanship. They ground the meat by hand or chopped it very fine, mixed in wild herbs such as sage or juniper, and packed the mixture into cleaned animal casings. The sausages were then smoked over slow-burning wood fires, hung up to dry, and stowed away for the trail. Unlike jerky, these sausages stayed juicy, carried plenty of flavor, and kept well for the journey. Perfect for a cowboy who wanted something better than beans but did not have time to cook a stew. Eaten cold, warmed on a skillet, or skewered over the flames, smoked venison sausage was rich, smoky, and filling. A rare mix of luxury and survival packed into one bite. You could even slice one straight from your saddlebag and eat it mid-ride. No fire, no plate, no fuss. For a cowboy riding solo through rough country, that kind of ready-to-eat comfort was worth more than gold. 14. Trail grits with bacon drippings. Grits were not just a staple of southern kitchens. They found their way onto the open range as well. Cowboys appreciated them because they were light to carry, simple to make, and quick to fill you up. All it took was boiling water, a handful of ground corn, and a good stir. What turned plain mush into something special was bacon drippings. After frying a few strips of bacon, if you were lucky enough to have some, the leftover grease got poured straight into the pot of grits. That salty, smoky hit transformed bland porridge into a meal worth sitting down for. Some cowboys added salt or a pinch of dried herbs if they had any, but most were just glad it was not beans again. It clung to your spoon, bulged your gut, and did not demand much firewood or fuss. Just a pot, a little patience, and something to scrape the bottom with. When you were halfway to nowhere with nothing but dust and daylight behind you, a bowl of hot grits felt like a warm handshake from home. 15. Antelope marrow toast. When cowboys got lucky with an antelope kill, they did not stop at the meat. They went after the bones too. Inside those long antelope legs sat a rich, buttery marrow that could keep a man going through days of hard riding. They would split the bones with a hatchet or smash them with rocks, scoop out the marrow and heat it in a skillet until it melted into bubbling golden oil. Then they'd spread it over fire-toasted sourdough or corn cakes if they had them, or even on flat stones used like makeshift plates. The flavor was deep, smoky, and greasy in the best sense, like nature's cowboy butter. It was rich enough to quiet hunger and rare enough to feel like a feast. Some old-timers swore it kept your joints loose and your aim steady. Cowboys treated bone marrow like a secret trick, the kind of thing only the old hands knew to hunt out. If you were green on the trail and saw a rider scraping that soft stuff onto bread, you might gag until you tried it. Frontier umami packed with fat, salt, and plain survival. 16. Burnt ends and scrap skillet. Cowboys wasted nothing. Not even the crispy bits stuck to the bottom of the pan. After a cookout, whatever remained, fat trimmings, charred ends of meat, odd scraps of bacon or beef, went straight back into the skillet for round two. They'd throw it all together, maybe toss in a chunk of potato or some dried onion, then fry it up in the leftover grease until the whole thing was crackling hot and smoky. It wasn't pretty, but it was rich, salty, crunchy, and full of cowboy fuel. Some even scraped pieces of biscuit or cornbread into the mix just to sop up the grease. It wasn't a planned meal so much as a cleanup that became dinner. And somehow those random crispy bits tasted better than the original roast. Maybe it was hunger. Maybe it was the fire. Or maybe it was simply that cowboys knew how to make something out of nothing. They called it scrap, hash, pan sweep, or just dinner. But it always disappeared fast. 17 salted fish on coals. If a cowboy happened upon a river and was lucky with a line, fish could end up on the menu. But out on the range, where ice was a memory and time was short, fresh fish did not stay fresh for long. That was where salt came into play. They caught whatever they could, trout, catfish, perch, cleaned them, packed them in plenty of salt, and hung them up to dry for a day or two. Once the flesh was firm and properly briny, they laid the fish right on hot coals. No skillet, just flame, fish, and a stick. The skin would blister and blacken, but inside the meat was steaming, flaky, and full of that deep, salty edge you only get from that cowboy method of curing. It was not fancy, and you ate around the bones, but you adapted fast. Every so often, someone would squeeze a little wild lemon or shake on some pepper if the chuck wagon happened to have any, but most of the time it was just fish and fire, exactly how nature handed it over. 18. Fire-roasted wild onions. You might not imagine onions saving a cowboy's day, but when you were riding for weeks with little more than beans and dried meat, a handful of wild onions felt like hitting pay dirt. They grew in bunches along creeks, riverbanks, and open plains. Cowboys picked them out by sight and smell. Thin stalks, a strong aroma, and a bite that hit like a mule kick. After gathering them, they were tossed whole onto hot stones or right into the embers until the papery skins blackened and split. Inside, the bulbs turned soft, sweet, and smoky. Strip away the charred outer layer, and what remained melted on the tongue like frontier candy. Some men ate them plain, others mixed them into whatever else was on the fire: stew, grits, or a pan-scrap hash. They did not fill you up much, but they brought a powerful hit of flavor that could make the plainest meal feel important. A little spark for a weary mouth. And after days of dust and stale bread, that roasted onion bite tasted like civilization, even if you were 100 miles from the nearest town. 19. Lye-cured hominy. Before canned goods and boxed cornflakes, hominy was a staple. Hearty, slow-cooked, and a bit of frontier chemistry. Out on the range, cowboys boiled dried corn kernels with lye. Yep, the same stuff used in soap making to strip the husks and free a soft, chewy center. It was not exactly fast food, but after rinsing and a long simmer, hominy became a filling base that really stuck to your ribs. They would cook it in a pot with water, a pinch of salt, maybe a bit of tallow or bone broth if they were lucky. The result sat somewhere between porridge and stew. Mild, earthy, and oddly satisfying. Some folks tossed in wild herbs, garlic, or scraps of meat when they had them. Most did not. It was plain, honest fare, and best of all, it kept a man going long after breakfast had worn off. Hominy did not grab headlines, but it earned respect. When the trail got rough and supplies ran low, corn that could take a beating and still feed the crew was worth its weight in gold. 20. Dried pumpkin chips. When fresh meat ran out and the trail dragged on, cowboys turned to something surprising. Pumpkin. Not the pie kind. Thick-skinned wild prairie pumpkins, sliced thin and left to sun until they went tough and leathery, just sweet enough to chew. It was trail candy with a bite. They shaved the flesh into ribbons, spread them on rocks, or hung them from saddle ropes, letting the sun do the work. No sugar, no salt, just natural drying and patience. Once dry, the chips went into pouches or roll bags. They did not rot, did not spoil, and offered a slow, steady chew that worked like nature's jerky, only without meat. Some cowboys rehydrated them into stews or mashed them into hot gruel. Most just gnawed them plain. After 3 days of nothing but beans and dust, even a slice of pumpkin tasted like dessert. It was the kind of food nobody bragged about, but you were damn grateful for when the storms hit and the next town was 50 miles away. 21. Fire-baked acorn bread. Cowboys did not always carry flour, but when they rode through oak country, acorns were everywhere. And with a little know-how and a lot of elbow grease, those bitter little nuts became a bread that kept men moving for miles. First came the cracking and shelling of the acorns, then hours, sometimes days, of soaking or boiling to pull the bitterness out. When they had been tamed, the nuts were mashed into a coarse flour or paste. That was mixed with water and a bit of animal fat. Then the dough was shaped into thick cakes and slapped onto a hot rock beside the fire. No yeast, no sugar, just survival baked into a crispy, nutty slab. It came out dense and a touch gritty, with an earthy taste that lingered. Kind of like the trail itself. Cowboys ate it with beans, dipped it into stew, or bit into it plain when the chuck wagon ran short. It was never anyone's favorite, but it was reliable. Out on the open range, that steadiness mattered more than flavor. 22. Brittle fried liver slabs. When a steer went down, nothing was wasted, least of all the liver. Rich in nutrients and quick to cook, liver was the kind of fuel that kept a man on his horse. They cut it into thick slices, laid it on a greased skillet or hot griddle, and let it sear until the edges curled and the aroma drew folk in. No fancy rubs, just a pinch of salt, a dash of black pepper if they had it, and maybe a splash of vinegar to tame the iron tang. It cooked fast, filled bellies faster than a stew, and gave tired hands a punch of energy when they needed it most. Yes, it was chewy, and yes, the flavor hit like a fist. But liver was not about delicacy. It was pure, hard fuel for men who could not afford to tarry. Paired with a gulp of black coffee or a strip of dry bread, it was the sort of meal that reminded you life on the range was not about luxury. It was about lasting until sundown. 23 roasted prickly pear pads. Out in the Southwest, where cacti outnumbered cows, cowboys learned to eat from the land, and that included cactus. Not the spines, of course. They would slice off the flat, prickly pear pads, scrape the glochids away with a knife or a hot branding iron, and set the pads to roast right over the fire. What came off the coals was smoky and a little tangy. Tender in the center, but with enough chew to feel like real food and not punishment. Sometimes they mixed it with beans or wrapped a pad around it on meat in a cloth. More often, they simply gnawed it plain, straight off the coals like a piece of campfire squash. It was not elegant, and it sure was not a delicacy, but it was green, fresh, and full of water. A blessing after days in the dry heat. When your canteen ran low and the only shade was under a thorn bush, a roasted cactus pad could feel like a 5-star meal. 24 dried corn and wild onion succotash. This was not your grandmother's creamy succotash. It was cowboy succotash. A dry skillet, slap-it-together dish made from whatever was foraged or carried from camp to camp. Cowboys kept dried corn in their gear because it was light, stable, and could be rehydrated quickly with a splash of water and a hard boil. When wild onions were in season, the dish came to life. They would chop the sharp, punchy onions, foraged from the roadside, and fry them in a pan with a lump of tallow or bacon grease. In went the soaked corn and maybe a handful of wild greens or a few black beans if someone had a reserve, and you ended up with a skillet full of color, crunch, and plenty of flavor that punched well above its simple parts. It was smoky and savory, with just enough corn sweetness to feel like a treat. Not bad for a meal made from field scraps and fire. 25 fire-baked apple and sage bannock. Out on the open range, dessert was a rare treat. But sometimes a cowboy cook would work a small miracle. Bannock is a plain flatbread, flour, water, and fat that could be slapped on a hot rock or wrapped around a stick and cooked right in the coals. The real surprise came when someone had apples, maybe dried slices from a trading post, or wild crab apples found along the trail, and a pinch of sage from the brush. They would mash the fruit, fold it into the dough, and stir in a handful of chopped sage for an aromatic, earthy note. Then the whole mass was flattened, wrapped in cloth or set in a skillet, and slow cooked until the crust turned golden and the center was just set. Some cooks tucked the round right beside the coals and flipped it with a knife blade, brushing off stray ash like it was nothing. If someone had a spoon of coarse sugar, it melted into the top and mingled with the smoke. Others poked small vents, so the steam carried the smell through camp. A man on night watch could follow that scent by moonlight and find the fire without a word. What emerged was smoky, herbal, and gently sweet. The kind of treat you would not expect in the middle of nowhere. For cowboys, it tasted like a bite of home. Soft, warm, and gone before you knew it. And if there was a dab of bacon grease to brush on top, that bannock did not stay around the fire for long. 25 open-range meals that kept cowboys fed, fired up, and maybe a bit smoky around the edges. No fancy gear, no backup plans, just cast iron, a campfire, and a whole lot of grit. The kind of cooking that rides in your memory the way a good horse carries you. Steady, simple, and right where you need to go. If this video gave you a taste of the Old West, hit that like button, subscribe for more forgotten bites of American history, and ring the bell so you do not miss what's cooking next. Tell us in the comments which trail recipe you want next. Beans three ways, sourdough flapjacks, or a pot of frontier stew, and share any family campfire tips of your own. And if you're still hungry, saddle up and watch our other videos. We've got outlaw saloon food, 1970s dinners, and dishes so strange they might make your grandma faint. Go on, we'll keep the fire warm.